Hey, it's Marcel. Imagine how awesome it would be if this year, 2023, your employees were more engaged and into their work. They made better decisions, collaborated without any of those people issues, and just performed at a high level to produce great work. As leaders, we know that these attributes eliminate countless headaches and help scale the business. But quite shockingly, we often see the exact opposite behaviors take place in our teams. So we developed a hybrid leadership course to help emerging leaders bring out the best in their people. So together with your management team, we're going to help you identify the leadership skills that will result in high performance in yourself and in your employees. We're going to identify what it takes to inspire, motivate, and engage human beings to do their best work. We're going to teach you the leadership habits that will attract A players to come work for your organization. You're going to learn how to overcome the number one obstacle to clear communication. And you'll discover your personality strengths and blind spots and how to overcome those blind spots to help improve your work relationships. If you want to learn more about this unique leadership course, visit my website, marcelschwantes.com, and click on training.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Hey, welcome to the show. Glad you are here, and thank you for spending time with us. If you're a longtime listener, we appreciate your loyalty and sticking with us. And if you're a new listener, welcome aboard. And if you like what you hear, hey, spread the love by sharing this episode with a friend. And it would be great if you could also leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast. So here is what's on my mind today. We're going to take a deep dive into a concept that we've talked about with numerous guests on the show. And, I've written about it in numerous articles as well. I speak of psychological safety. So we've had the brilliant Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School come on the show before. She spent years studying the concept, and she talks about psychological safety. In fact, she describes it like this, and I quote, "An atmosphere where one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes," end quote. And folks, in this day and age, when we create an environment where psychological safety is present, it significantly improves employee productivity. But not only that, that's the business case, of course, but it also helps our workplaces to become more inclusive. And when that happens, teams become more creative and innovative. That's the power of psychological safety. So when a book comes across my desk on the topic, a book endorsed by the likes of Seth Godin and Greg McKeon and Amy Edmondson herself, it's going to get my attention. So today, I'm going to be speaking with authors Karolin Helbig and Minnette Norman, who co-wrote the brand spanking new book, The Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. I'm smiling because I just love that subtitle. So in response to the author's own experiences and those of their clients, a former executive consultant, that would be Karolin, and a former corporate executive turned leadership consultant, and that would be Minnette, this dynamic duo has become the first authors to provide a concise and practical guide for implementing psychological safety in the workplace. And we're going to get into some of those proven strategies to help you guys increase psychological safety in your own teams and to lead more powerfully by being more human. So let me tell you a little bit about these fascinating guests. Karolin Helbig spent more than 15 years as a top management consultant with McKinsey & Company, working on world-class problems and creating change with organizations in industries from banking to public sector to chemicals in Europe, and the Middle East. So then, building on more than those 2 decades of experience as a management consultant, along with her expertise in science, Karolin helps leaders increase their effectiveness and transform their organizations through mindset, emotional intelligence, and of course, psychological safety. Karolin has a PhD in human genetics, and today she integrates neuroscience and how the brain works and applies all that to leadership practices. Minnette Norman is an inclusive leadership consultant focused on psychological safety, of course. And previously, she spent decades leading global technical teams in the software industry. In fact, in her most recent position, she served as vice president of engineering at Autodesk. And in that role, she was responsible for influencing more than 3,500 engineers in North America, Europe, and Asia to help to nurture this collaborative and inclusive culture in the engineering space, which is very hard to do these days. And in 2017, Minnette was named one of the most influential women in Bay Area business by the San Francisco Business Times. And in 2018, she was awarded the Business Role Model of the Year in the IT Silicon Valley Awards. Interestingly enough, in 2019, Minnette left her software career so that she could help leaders create the conditions where their employees can do their best work. She holds degrees in drama and French from Tufts University. Karolin and Minette now joins. Ladies, I'm so thrilled that you're here. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you so much, Marcel. I'm glad to be here.
As am I. Thank you for having us.
Yes. And I should have noted in my introduction that Karolin is actually joining us from Germany. And of course, Minnette is out in the Bay Area. So appreciate you ladies being here. So we have this tradition on the show that we want to clear before we do a deep dive in the book. You guys ready?
Yes. Sure.
All right. So what's your story? And I'll start with you, Karolin.
My story. Actually, I'm passionate about human beings. I want to understand how human beings function. And that was for me the reason to study human biology. And that was also the reason why at some point I left McKinsey and really focused on consultant work, helping people work together in a better way and really be their most creative selves at work.
I'm really curious about that and bringing the science of all of this into the discussion as well. How about you, Minnette? What's your story?
I have a funny story, I think, because as you said, I was a drama French major and I spent 30 years in the tech industry, and how those two things came to be are rather odd. But it started, when I was quite young and I couldn't make it as an actor and I had to find something else to do. And I fell into a job where there was a computer on my desk, and I found out I was quite good at learning software, and I ended up spending 30 years in the software industry. But as you said, that last job when I was VP of engineering, and that's a much longer story than we have time for today, but I was responsible for transforming how we developed software and modernizing it. And what I realized is that although there's a lot of technical complexity to this, it's truly a human problem. And it was a human challenge in how we interact and how we collaborate. And are we inclusive? And do we listen to one another? And what I found, unfortunately, is that that wasn't very common. And instead, people always felt that they were right and they weren't willing to listen to divergent points of view. And ultimately, I decided I had done as much as I could do in one company. And what I really wanted to do was to see if I could start my own business and help as many organizations and leaders as possible become more evolved, more inclusive leaders. And that's what I do today. And we, Karolin and I, are lucky enough to have come across each other, from different parts of the world when we met in a class on psychological safety in 2021.
Okay.
And we struck up this friendship, collaboration, interest in each other's thoughts. And we can talk more about that. We wrote this book together, but we still haven't met in person.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the case for a lot of us post COVID. We work together and collaborate together, and some of us have never actually met. But what's funny is that this book came after COVID. The concept of psychological safety has been around for decades now. I mean, Amy did her research, I don't know how long ago, and she wrote the Fearless Organization. So I want to talk about the term itself, right? Can mean so many things to so many different people. I mean, it's kind of loosely tossed around in media now. Psychological safety can mean so many things. So in your own words, explain the concept of psychological safety to our listeners. And I'll go to Minnette on this one.
Okay. Yeah. And so you read Amy's definition, which we love, and we obviously are huge followers of her work. So I'm going to rephrase in a way, and then I'm going to take it beyond a definition, because yes, psychological safety is this belief and this feeling that in a group setting, it's a safe place for me to ask a question, to take a risk, to make a mistake, to challenge the status quo, and to know that I'm not going to be rejected, I'm not going to be humiliated, and I'm not going to be excluded from the group as a result of that. So that's a definition. But what Karolin and I really like to think about it is beyond the definition, it's a deeply human feeling. And we know it in our bodies and our hearts when we have it and when we don't. So just really briefly, in one of the best, most psychologically safe teams I've ever been a part of, this was actually decades ago, but it was so memorable because every single member of that group could speak up, we could argue, we could disagree, and at the same time, we all knew that this was for the collective good, and that we were trying to create something wonderful together. We were developing a product, and it was going to be better if we debated the ideas and came to the best solution.
Yeah.
Now, the opposite, I just have to tell you the opposite, because that's the deep feeling that so many of us, unfortunately, have experienced. And that is when we don't have it. And what that feels like, you raise your hand in a meeting when someone says, ask me anything, and you ask a question and the person shoots you down and makes you feel small or makes you feel stupid for asking the question. And it is devastating. I've been there. We've all been there at some point. You feel that you will never open your mouth again. And you never, you have been diminished in the eyes of the other people around you. So it's so damaging when we don't have it.
Fascinating, because like you said, we've all been there. I've had the experiences myself. We know what a psychologically safe environment feels like you said, but we also know the opposite side of the coin and how devastating that can be, even to our health and well-being, right? In my case, the lack of psychological safety in a stifling pressure cooker environment with toxic management landed me in ER and 1 month of disability. So that's my personal story for another time, okay? So that begs a question. And Karolin, why is it so hard for leaders to create psychologically safe environments today?
That's actually a great question, because psychological safety is not what happens by default. It's not what happens automatically. And I think there are two main reasons why this is a little bit more tricky than just understanding it and implementing it. And one is the biologist speaking, we are not wired for that. Okay. We are not wired for creating psychological safety, because we all have our brains, right? And our brains, what's the purpose of the brain? The brain's main purpose is to ensure our survival, right? And to ensure our survival, this means we try to avoid every risk. We are not risk seeking, we are risk avoiding. And especially, in former times, it was really a question of survival, running away from the saber-toothed tiger, for example. And now it's, your manager frowning, or someone nodding or shaking their head, for example. And we have the exact same fight, flight, freeze reaction, which in former times was life-saving, and now it's not serving us anymore. And so we are wired for risk avoiding, also in interpersonal risk-taking moments. So, for example, speaking up is a courageous act, and we need to have to overcome kind of our natural wiring for avoiding this risk. We have this amygdala telling us, don't go there, don't speak up, stay safe, hide, stay covered, something like that. So leaders really need to encourage the teams to take these risks, to overcome their natural wiring. So this is not easy, and leaders really have the responsibility to encourage everyone and not punish someone who speaks up, because then this is a signal it's not safe to speak up, right? So this natural wiring is one of the big reasons why it's so difficult for leaders to implement psychological safety. And I think there's another one which is really big, and this is our traditional model of leadership.
Yes.
Traditionally, we think leaders have to be perfect. They have to know it. They have to know all the answers. And it's traditionally, leaders think vulnerability is weakness. And giving this traditional leadership model together with our natural wiring, this makes it so tricky to implement psychological safety.
I love how you tied in the I guess the neuroscience or the biology. I mean, that your background so intricately to how traditionally we have been conditioned, really, to kind of go against the grain of what naturally we should be bent towards doing, which is creating these safe environments where people are allowed to speak freely, et cetera. But it's funny that you said that for decades, or maybe I don't know, over 100 years. I mean, we've hung on to these relics of the industrial age that have been transferred from generation to generation. We've picked up bad habits of bosses that have told us this is how you lead or manage people, and it's really trying to move a mountain to me, because people like us, we're banging the drum on this is what workplaces need to become more sustainable, more productive, more efficient, more engaging. And yet we're going against the grain of historically what you just said is historically and traditionally these held beliefs, falsely held beliefs we've been hanging on to for so long, that pushes against how we should actually be, in relation to other people. That was a long ramble, but I don't know if you get what I'm saying. It's a really tough challenge.
Yeah, absolutely, Marcel. And I think this traditional leadership model once made sense when leaders had to optimize for processes and people did repetitive work. But now the whole world changed, and what are people doing? People are paid for thinking. They really need to be creative. They need to be at their best. And you can't think creatively if you have fear in your system. Then it's kind of exclusive, mutually exclusive. Either you're creative or you have fear. So there's no combination of the two. So now leaders have a completely different task to do, ensuring everyone feels psychologically safe. And this is a complete different game than in former times, leaders optimizing repetitive industrial processes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to dive into this playbook. So, it's truly a workbook. I mean, if you want to get practical, folks, I can't think of any other published book with as much tools and strategies on implementing psychological safety as this playbook. This is it. So, ladies, you break the playbook down into 5 major plays, is what you call them, right? So the cool part about this playbook is that you can start anywhere. You don't have to go from start to finish. I mean, because all the parts are kind of self-contained, right? So pick and choose which of the strategies or moves in the playbook, if you will, works best for you, because they're all going to apply equally to creating that kind of psychologically safe environment. Is that accurate, what I just said?
Yeah, and that was so intentional. The way we came to write this is that, you mentioned Amy Edmondson and her work, and there's a lot of other work out there that shows all the research. And so we felt we're not going to go into that. We can certainly reference it, but what we wanted to provide was the how-to manual. And that, again, you don't have to read it end to end, even though by design it's short. The idea is pick it up, try something, see how it works. Next week, something else might resonate. And so we want it to be completely usable, completely digestible, and modular.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I picked out 3 plays just for the sake of time. And Minnette, play number 1, you title it "Communicate Courageously." It's funny, Karolin, you've been talking a little bit of, you kind of gave us a sneak preview that we have to be courageous. Of course, it's counterintuitive though for us to step out of that comfort zone and be daring and courageous enough to confront reality. So courage to me is one of the most fundamental skills that a leader has to have in order to create a psychologically safe environment. And, I can't think of anything more courageous than having to communicate with vulnerability. Karolin mentioned that already. That's going to be a huge step out of your comfort zone for a lot of people. So this is the first play in the book, Communicate Courageously. And I'd love for you, Minnette, to kind of connect the dots for us here. I mean, walk us through this.
Yeah, we started with this one. As I said, you can go anywhere in the book at any time, but we started with this one because we think it's just so fundamental if you are a leader at any level that you start to embrace that you don't have all the answers. As Karolin said, this model no longer serves us. But the only way that people are going to believe that that you mean it and that this is a safe environment is if you, as a leader or a manager of people, start to show that you're open to other perspectives, that you don't have all the answers, that you're willing to listen. And so, we talk about actually explicitly saying, one of the things we say in Communicate Courageously is let's hear some dissent. Let's hear what we haven't thought of, and then to invite those other perspectives. Now, that's hard for leaders. I've witnessed, in the workplace, leader will get up, they'll give their presentation, they'll say any questions, but they don't really want the hard questions. They kind of want people to say, great idea, I'm all on board. And when they get a challenging question, they're often not prepared for it. So part of what we're really asking leaders to do is to just embrace the discomfort, be open to the fact that you're going to be challenged, you're going to get a dissenting viewpoint. And, one of the best things you can do is just to even acknowledge that you have emotions as a leader. You are not an unfeeling machine. You don't switch off your emotions when you arrive at work. You're going to react to things. And so the more you're aware and you're bravely self-aware, we say, that I'm an emotional being. I am human, just like everybody else. And I need to get in touch with what those emotions are so I can skillfully figure out how I want to react when I get challenged, when I get defensive, when I get angry, as opposed to just being ruled by those emotions. And, one of the things that we include in that play about Communicate Courageously is that don't forget a sense of humor is a very powerful thing at work. And we all take ourselves so seriously. But if you as a leader can look at your own fallibility and laugh at your own mistakes, how empowering and wonderful is that for the rest of your organization?
Yeah. How would you say, Minnette, trust? How does trust play a factor in creating a psychologically safe environment? Because, you might be that leader that will say, are there any questions facing his or her team? And crickets, because they're not safe enough to even push back against an idea that was proposed. They fear their manager. So I don't know if that's a lack of trust, but does trust come first before psychological safety?
Well, it's really interesting. And we had some dialogue with Amy Edmondson about this in the class as she came to speak to our class, because it's often confused, what's the difference between trust and psychological safety? And one way to just differentiate it is that trust often is between two individuals. Like Marcel, you and I haven't yet spent much time together, so we don't really know if we can trust each other. But the more we get to know each other, we'll start to feel this is a truly trustworthy person. I can share secrets, etc. Whereas the psychological safety is more of a group phenomenon. So even within a group, let's say there are 8 people in a team, you may have great levels of trust with a few of the people, But as a group, this is not an entirely safe environment because there's someone in that group who's going to eye roll you when you say something, or so who's going to talk over you and ignore you. So it's really that difference between individuals who trust and then a group phenomenon. And, to your question about when there's crickets, when a leader asks for questions and no one answers, well, there's something going on there in the collective, in the culture, whether it's that leader or a leader below them who doesn't create a safe space. And so I am not going to be vulnerable and ask that question because somewhere in this structure, it doesn't feel safe.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I thought this was a great segue to play two. Karolin, I'm going to go to you on this one. So, you have communicate courageously, but communication is a two-way street, right? Speaking, but also the ability to listen. And so that's play number two. It's master the art of listening. I want to me, listening is, and you, ladies, you mentioned this in the book, and I 100% agree that listening is probably the most underdeveloped leadership skill. And this boggles my mind because I see it as well repeatedly with my own coaching clients. So let me start with this, Karolin. Why do you think this is such a underdeveloped skill? Why do leaders lack this human skill of listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. And probably every one of us thinks we are already listening, right? But so often when we don't speak and seem to be listening, we are not really listening. If we really truly ask ourselves, are we listening, and are honest about it, we discover, instead of really listening and really trying to understand the other person, what we're actually doing is, preparing our response or thinking about something else, being distracted or something like that. So really truly listening with the intent of understanding the other person is really an art, as we call it in our book. And this is something which can be practiced, and it's like a muscle we can exercise. So the good news is we can all get better in listening. And in our book, we share really simple practices which can be done without any extra time, just with what we do anyhow during the day. The key is really self-awareness, which is part of emotional intelligence, and really being aware, what am I actually doing? So a little bit taking the observer perspective towards yourself and see what you are doing, catching yourself when your mind is drifting away. We all have a monkey mind, we all have distractions, and then come back to the focusing on the other person. And what is really what I often see is lacking in leaders is being committed to understand the other person. So often leaders are not really open to understand the other person because they are so convinced of their own point of view and want to convince the other person of their own view, or they are not really humble enough to acknowledge other people might also have a valuable point of view and a perspective. So often people are so convinced they have this need to be right. They think what their perspective is the truth. So in our book, we really invite everyone to be a little bit more humble and acknowledge what our perspective is not the truth, and get a little bit more curious about understanding other perspectives.
Yeah. I'm wondering if humility and psychological safety are like close cousins of the same family tree, because to me, it's so hard sometimes to, speak with courage, to confront something that, instead of sweeping under the rug, or even acknowledge it. Like you said, one of you said that you may not have all the answers, and we have to be okay with that. And that creates safety with other people to also say, hey, I don't have the answers either, but I have a boss that makes it okay for me to not be perfect all the time. So, and I think that takes a lot of humility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think humility is a very crucial element. Maybe not, what did you say, the cousin or the brother of psychological safety, but definitely a very crucial element. And I think, and I'd love to come back to what you said in the introduction, that you like so much our subtitle, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. I think this being more human, including humility, including curiosity, and so on, this is really a very crucial element. And maybe if you don't mind, I can share a story about what we mean with being more human and showing up as really a whole human being. So during my time with McKinsey, one of my directors, he was really brilliant, one of the most brilliant minds in this firm with a lot of brilliant minds. And I was full of respect and full of admiration. And then one time we had a very difficult, challenging project, one meeting, especially challenging with a board of client organization. That was really tough. And then we returned to the team room and I thought, okay, another round of number crunching and analysis and so on. And then what happened was he really turned out to be a human being. And he said, I'm done for the day. And for the first time, he opened up showing emotions. And guess what? That was the moment when my admiration turned into true connection. And that was lovely to see. He was a human being. And then he proposed, let's call it a day. Let's go out and go to the restaurant, spend some time together. And that was fabulous. And from then on, we had a very close human connection.
I want to touch on something that, to master the art of listening, you talk about being fully present. When you say be fully present, that sure, we can imply that means, turn off your devices and be present. But this is more than just that. It's because to me, there's people have so much going on in their minds. There's like emotional clutter. And so they're not emotionally present enough to be in the space of listening. I don't know. Can you touch on that a little bit more? Be fully present?
Absolutely. And I think just what you said, closing down these external distractions, that's just the first step. But what's really more tricky and more are our internal distractions. And our mind is jumping all over the place. And we have, in our book, we call it so many apps running in the background. And so the key is to shut down, to first of all, become aware of what's going on in our brain and our mind, and really shut down all these other apps and then really focus completely on the other person with the intent of understanding them. And this is not easy. And this means letting go of our need to be right, inviting more humility.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, Minnette, I want to jump to play number 4 in the playbook, and that is embrace risk and failure. And another one of these that I 100% agree with both of you, that how we leaders deal with risk and failure has a huge impact, right, on psychological safety of our teams. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. So and the reason I say that is because some leaders may react differently than others when it comes to how they deal with risk and failure. So start from the top with this play, number 4 here. What does it mean? Maybe, is that a good starting point? What does it mean to embrace risk and failure? And then walk us through some of the plays.
Sure. So, and I would say that this is Karolin's favorite play as a scientist, because there's so much failure and experimentation in science. But of course, this is just as important to me. So let me start, and maybe Karolin wants to chime in. One of the things that I recognized, certainly in 3 decades in the software industry, was how rarely we actually talked about failure. There's a stigma often in business settings to acknowledge that we're going to fail along the way. And what our supposition is in this whole play about embracing failure is that it is only through acknowledging that there are going to be failures and also recognizing that breakthroughs and innovation do not happen unless there are failures along the way. Like, you may have incremental improvements without a big failure, but if you're trying to make a step change and you're trying to invent something new or innovate, there are going to be failed experiments. And so what we're recommending and what we've seen be successful when it's put into practice is that leaders talk about failure openly, and that this becomes a practice in staff meetings, in one-on-ones, to say what went well, what didn't go well, what can we learn from this? Because the more we can actually start to talk about failure, not be terrified of it, not think that it's going to ruin our career, but instead to say, what can we learn from this? And, one of the things that both of us found separately, but we both loved, is Benjamin Zander. And Benjamin Zander and his wife wrote this book called The Art of Possibility. And he is the former conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. And he has this wonderful video where he talks about when his music students make a mistake, instead of the shame of, oh God, I hit a wrong note or I missed a measure, instead what he does is he throws his hands up in the air and he says, "How fascinating." And it's this just celebration of how interesting. Something went wrong. What might we learn from that? And to destigmatize and to say, like, that's not embarrassing. That's not humiliating. Your career with this orchestra or with this organization is not over. Instead, how can we collectively learn from this? So it becomes a regular thing to talk about failure instead of it being this scary thing in the corner that we never discuss and that's really, taboo. And I will tell you one good thing that has developed in the software industry that I think is applicable to every industry, and it's why we included it as one of our moves. And it's the concept of a blameless postmortem. We include that in our play for. And the idea is, and it happened, the reason it was developed is, like, we're on Zoom right now, right? If Zoom has an outage, a service outage, which happens in cloud companies, what the team will do immediately after is have a blameless postmortem and say, what went wrong? What caused this outage? What are we going to do differently? And it's never about pointing fingers. It's not saying, Marcel, you didn't do your part, or Karolin, you missed something. Instead is collectively, what do we learn from this failure? And what are we going to change going forward? And it takes away the blame and the shame and instead becomes a learning opportunity. And so that's the concept. And, I'm sure Karolin has to add from a science perspective, but that's the basics of what we mean by embracing risk and failure.
And taking away the blaming and shaming, as Minnette just said, this is exactly what leaders need to do. And this, again, is not easy because it's not by it's logic that we don't talk so often about failure because no one likes failure, right? It's something we avoid, we hide, we definitely don't want to talk about. So leaders really need to invite everyone in a blameless way, in an interested way, in a curious way. And this is where I think we could really learn from science, because scientists are doing this all the time. They are running experiments and they get data. It's not good or bad. It's just data, and failure is data, and maybe even something where you can learn more from. I once had a client, and this sticked with me. He said he pitched a couple of times. He really built his own business, and it was a tough time for him in the startup phase. And I talked with him and asked him, how do you deal with all these setbacks? You go into the risk and then you don't get the project. And he said to me, Karolin, you know what? My motto is either I learn or either I win or I learn. And I found it so fabulous. And this is something we really, really need to encourage everyone on our teams, that failure, taking out the emotional component, blaming, shaming, and so on, and instead getting more interested into what can we learn from that?
Yeah, there is so many countless examples of organizations and even entrepreneurs and founders that have failed miserably, but they call it fail forward, right? It's learning. It's like you said, I love it. Not blame and shame. It's looking at those moments of failure as opportunities for learning something new and being curious about it. And and that helps us to advance in our professional growth or human growth. I love all that. Okay, so I want to ask you both a question that I often ask my guests. So I'm going to start with you, Minnette. What would you say is your ultimate hope for people reading this book?
Our hope, and I think that I will be very interesting to hear Karolin's hope versus mine, but I think we've talked about this a lot as a duo, because we really want to change the workplace in a positive way. We want leaders to understand that they have a huge role to play in making the workplace better, more innovative, more fun, more creative, and more successful for everybody. We want every single human being who goes to work every day to have a positive experience and not be coming home beaten down and feeling like this is zapping my soul because I'm not appreciated for who I am. My voice isn't welcome. I can't do my best work. We want to flip the switch on that. And we also know that it takes everyone's participation. Leaders can set the tone, but everyone plays a role. And so we just want to help everyone have a better experience in work, which we think will translate into the rest of life in the world.
Karolin?
Yeah, that's exactly our shared hope. And I think this is making a difference in this respect would really be crucial, because so many people really suffer from psychologically unsafe environments. And it's not only about their motivation going down, the engagement going down. They are really suffering. It's really taking a toll on their health, for example. And during our launch party, we really, someone said that he's convinced our book could save lives. And I'm thinking back of a McKinsey colleague, and he shared with me that during the whole first year, when he sat in the plane, in the Monday morning plane, the red-eye plane, he wished the plane crashed, so that the whole horror of being on this project would end. And this was really so horrible for me to hear. And I think so many people suffer at work. And suffering at work means, we spend most of our waking hours at work. That means suffering in life. And we really want to contribute that this doesn't need to be the case. And we really want to contribute to change that.
Yeah, the suffering is real, folks. It's emotional suffering, mental suffering, physical suffering, even spiritual suffering.
Yes.
It is something that does need to be addressed. All right, ladies, as we wind down here, I pose you the leadership love question, tradition on the show. So of all the ideas discussed, or maybe one of the moves, plays that we haven't covered yet, how do we lead as leaders with practical and actionable love day in and day out? And I'll start with Minnette.
Okay. I think the way we show practical love at work and as leaders is that we are truly inclusive to everybody. And that's our last play is actually about inclusive rituals. And that is seeing everyone, hearing everyone, respecting everyone's unique experiences and viewpoints and personalities, and truly expressing that we are all human. We are collectively human. No one is superior to another, and everyone has value to add. And so this inclusivity and leading with inclusion, I think, is an expression of practical love for our shared humanity.
Excellent. What about you?
Yeah, maybe linking back to what we discussed earlier about the shift in our model of leadership. What does it mean to lead people? And I love the quote by Simon Sinek: take care of your people, and then your people take care of the business. So leaders today really need to take care of their people in a way that everyone feels psychologically safe, because this is the absolute foundation that everyone can really do their best work and be innovative, creative, and so on. So actually, I think leading today is really love in action in a way, because you take care in an empathetic, compassionate way of human beings, and you show up as a human being.
That's great. All right, ladies, you close us out your way with a key takeaway or something to keep us inspired. And I'll start with Minnette.
What I would offer as a key takeaway is that every single human being can make a difference in the workplace, in your behavior, in how you show up, in how you listen to others, in how you react. And you can make or break the culture. You can increase or decrease the level of psychological safety. And it only takes small actions put into practice every single day. It's not that you have to do everything at once. You can just try one thing, and that's going to make a positive difference. And so my call to action for everyone is try one thing today. And if it doesn't make a difference, try something else. Something is going to have a positive impact.
My key takeaway is I'd love to encourage everyone to find the courage to show up as a human being, because then everyone else is invited to show up as a human being too. And then we can all be more productive, more creative, and more happy.
It's been a great conversation. The book, again, is called The Psychological Safety Playbook. If you're watching on YouTube, there is the cover. And ladies, if people want to connect with you, find out more about the book and what you do, where can they go?
We have a website for the book, which is the psychologicalsafetyplaybook.com. So easy to remember. And there are all the links to the retailers there. We have a bunch of sample content if people are curious. And then we also encourage people to connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to interact. We love to have dialogue on this topic. So both of us are on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. Hey, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much, Marcel.
Thank you so much, Marcel.
You can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast, and also look for my show notes on my website, marcelschwantes.com. I will put all the resources there to this episode, including the website, so you can reach out to the ladies, as well as a YouTube link for you to watch the show. And finally, hey, we're always looking for sponsors to help us spread the Love in Action movement globally. If you're interested, let's chat. You can reach me on my website or find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.